Hi, I'm Sophia, and this is the Geek Group. Today we're continuing our lessons in sewing techniques, and today I'm going to be talking about the dart. A dart is a technique that you can use to make clothes that fit in every single proportion except one fit you better. It's a technique that you use to bring clothing in a particular area. If it's a pair of trousers, you might be bringing in the waist. If it's a coat, you might be bringing in the top or the side or the back or the waist. You have a lot of options. Our tools for today are as follows. First, we're going to need a set of pins, a seam ripper because inevitably something will go wrong, a piece of chalk, snips to cut thread, a measuring tape, and a pair of really good scissors. And of course, our safety dinosaur. The garment I'm going to be working with first is a coat. This coat is in the pea coat style, and it's been designed to be very boxy. The original design is pretty rectangular, but that doesn't look good on everybody, so we're going to put some darts in so that if you happen to be a person with a lot going on up here and a lot going on out here, but not so much in the middle, you can make this coat fit you a lot better and accentuate your waist. The first thing we have to do is take out this belt. Now, we're going to put the dart in the sides and the back, so we're really going to bring this coat in a great deal at the waist. I picked this coat for a couple of reasons. One, it isn't lined. If this coat were lined, and many high-quality coats are, it would be a lot harder to do this activity. In fact, you would have to take the lining out, put the darts into the coat, maybe even put them into the lining, and then put the lining back in. There are some ways that you can do that without taking the lining completely out. You just take it out at the bottom, and you're working inside a tunnel. But I can't recommend it for the beginning sewer. So when you want to try this technique at home, find a coat that is not lined. This coat is particularly good for this activity because the seams are really straight and they're not finished particularly well. They don't have a fabric covering. They're not double sewed down. These are things that would cause it to be a little more difficult to put in a dart. Now, before we get started cutting up this coat, I want to talk to you a little bit about what a dart looks like. First of all, darts are always done on a fold. That's how they work. You take the fabric and you fold it over. And there are two kinds of darts that you can do. The first dart is a full dart. A full dart starts very close to the edge of the fold, goes way out, and then comes back towards the edge of the fold. That's a full dart. You could also have a dart that is on the edge of fabric that only goes halfway. So for example, if you had a seam here and you wanted to put a dart in, you would just have kind of a triangle, like that. These are used all the time in the backs of shirts and coats to make them fit better. Those are the two basic shapes. Now, as you might imagine, this shape creates a kind of hourglass in the fabric. So, if you are a curvy, hourglass type person, like me, you need these, because otherwise the coat would hang like this, straight off, and make your shoulders and your hips the same width, which makes you look like a giant tube, which is not as sexy as they say. However, if you sew in on the side here with the dart, and in on the side here with the dart, and maybe put another two in the back to make room for your badunkadunk, then you're going to have a coat that fits a lot better, or a shirt that fits a lot better and accentuates the waist. So that's the goal of the dart in the first place. Putting darts in fabric, especially finished fabric, require a lot of math. Now, if you are using a pattern, they've already done the math for you, and they put guides in the pattern. You transfer those with chalk to your garment, and you just sew along the dotted line. But since we don't have a pattern, we're making it up as we go today, I'm going to start by turning this coat inside out. Actually, I'm going to start by putting this coat on so you can see what it looks like when it's boxy. Now, this coat is large, and I am 4'2", so this thing's going to be enormous on me. You can see that the sides are really straight. They're not tucked in at my waist at all. So I'm going to put the first darts in. I also want to point out that in the back, it's really straight. It's not fitted to the back of me. Now, I am wearing a mic pack on the back, so that does get in the way. Back to our table. The first thing we need to do is turn this coat inside out. It's not nearly as big on me as I expected. This happens all the time. It might be that it's a child's coat, a large child's coat, and I'm so small that's why it fits me. You should always try things on before you buy them, especially when you're buying them in a thrift store. They're not always organized to be really accurate in placing the garments. So the first thing I have to do is create a fold. I don't really have a fold here, I have a seam, but it's kind of the same thing. I'm going to make sure that I'm working with the side seam and not the back seam. The other thing I need to pay attention to is where the belt loops are. I can actually see where they are because I see the threads that hold the belt loops on. And I want to make sure that I don't sew into the belt loop. I mean, if I was taking out a whole bunch of inches from the waist of this coat, I would have to maybe take these belt loops out completely. But that would be a pretty drastic change. You really only need to take out a couple of inches, maybe ½ an inch on this side, ½ an inch on the other side, ½ an inch in two places in the back, and you've really changed the shape of the garment. So here's my fold, and I'm going to start making some notations mathematically. I've got my blue chalk, and I've got my tape measure. I'm going to measure from the armpit seam, which should be symmetrical on this coat on both sides, to the bottom. It's 16 inches. I also note that this belt loop starts at 4½ inches. Now I'm going to assume that this jacket was meant to have the belt at the waist. So when I make the widest part of that dart, in my model, it's this part right here. The widest part is going to be where that belt loop is. If I didn't have a belt loop on this jacket, and lots of jackets don't have belt loops, I would put the jacket on and I would mark it with a piece of chalk where my waist is. Now this jacket has been made standardized. It looks like Cherokee made it and they made 8 million of these. Well, people are not all the same. So Cherokee's going with like the most likely combination of measurements. And they're pretty accurate in how they do that. But if you're a little different, like I am, then you're going to want to mark your waist yourself by putting the coat on and marking it with chalk. So I'm going to find the middle of these two belt loops. They're 2 inches, so I have to go first 4½ inches to the first one, and then 1 more inch. See if I can do that math. That's about the middle of the belt loop. And I can check it by measuring from here to the bottom, which looks like 10½ inches, and from here to the bottom, which is still 10½ inches. So I did a nice perpendicular angle here. Right angle right there. All right, so now I have to decide where I'm going to start my arc, how wide my arc is going to get, and where my arc is going to end. And it doesn't have to be symmetrical. In fact, in a lot of cases, not having it be symmetrical is better. If I go back to my drawing, I'm going to make a new one for you. And I'm not going to draw on my fabric because I know how badly this can go. If I have my neck up here and my shoulders here and my bosoms is here and my waist here and my hips here, these things are not symmetrical. In fact, my waist might be closer to my bosoms than it is to my hips. So in that case, I would want my dart to start under my bosom, cut into my waist, and then have a nice long arc back to the edge of my hip. That is going to create room for my hips, and it's going to follow the contours of my body. Your dart might do the same thing. You can make it symmetrical. There's nothing against making it symmetrical. If your body is really symmetrical, then do that. So it looks like I'm starting this arc. I'm going to make it the tallest at 5.5 inches. And I know from experience that I really only want to do about 3/4 of an inch in. Now, if you're only doing one dart, like in the back of a garment at the center, it's not super important to keep track of all these measurements. But because I have to reproduce this exact thing on the other side of the garment, I really need to have these measurements down exactly so that they're the same. I'm going to start my arc right below this blue bit, which is about 1 inch under the arm seam. And then I'm going to end this arc with lots of room for my hips. So it's going to come out pretty dramatically. If I go down from the armpit, I think I'm going to end this arc at 8 inches. I'm going to jot these measurements down because if I don't write them down, I'll have to go back and measure them again. I'm going to put them on my little model arc here. So this is 1 inch. This is 5.5 inches for the widest part. And this is 8 inches. Now I'm going to draw the arc. There we go. So this is the line that I'm actually going to sew on. That's what it looks like. Right there. We have the gentle incline here and a shorter, faster decline there. So now I have to recreate this on the other side. It's a good thing that I didn't go by where the blue ended, because the blue ends a lot farther down on this side than it did on the other one. And that's just because these clothing are made quickly by machines, and the reason they're inexpensive is because they're not made very carefully. So, first mark is at 1 inch. The midpoint is at 5.5 inches. And the end point is at 8. I'm going to go 3/4 in. From the stitching line, not from the edge of the fabric. Okay, I do need to pin this because it can move around in the sewing machine. Doesn't really matter what direction you go with the pins. I'm actually going to be sewing on that blue line that I made, so it's really convenient. I do need to pat this with my fingers and make sure there's no wrinkles underneath. Wrinkles will ruin your dart. The fabric has to be flat and smooth for the whole distance. Little word on pinning technique. You go straight into the fabric, then angle it and push it through. If you have a hard plastic underneath your sewing or table, wooden table, it can be really helpful because your pin doesn't go through the table, but it does go nicely through the fabric. All right, double checking. I'm actually going to look and make sure there's no wrinkles there before I sew. Okay, we're ready to go over the machine and do some sewing. I'm using a straight stitch, and I'm actually going to start well along the line of stitching that is already there in the jacket. This will make my dart blend more easily. I'm going to go backwards to knot it. Theoretically. And on the other end, I'm going to kind of run along the stitching that's already there as well. Okay, now I do have to zigzag all of these. So I'm going to take my pins out. And I'm going to secure the edge of the fabric with a zigzag stitch so that it doesn't unravel. I'm also going to cut snips into the fabric so that it can ease the curve. We talked a little bit about that last time, but we're going to do it again. Now that the sewing is done, I should snip off the extra, cut into the fabric so that it eases, and I'll show you what I mean by that, and then go on and make more darts if I need to. But I'm gonna put it on first. And if you're sewing at home for yourself, you've picked up something that's too large and you're cutting it down, it's always good to try it on before you actually cut it. Once you've cut it, it's too late to go back. You can't add more fabric. You can't undo the fact that you've taken out too much. But before you cut it, you can still pull out these stitches fairly easily. So I'm going to try it on and show you what it looks like. When I'm sewing for myself normally, I try things on all the time. Like every step I'm trying it on to make sure. Because a lot of what I'm doing here, I'm not using a pattern, I'm guesstimating, I'm measuring myself, I'm measuring the fabric, and that's a way that you can ensure that you're not going to make a mistake. Now, if you're a perfect size 8, and there are people out there like that, my best friend Lee is a perfect 8. If I use a pattern, I use a size 8 pattern for her, it'll fit her every single time. In that case, I'd just slap a size 8 pattern on top of this and use that. But I'm not a perfect size 8. In fact, I'm like a size 8 at the top and a size 10 at the bottom, kind of a 6 in the middle, so it can get pretty complicated. You should be able to see already, if I'm not standing behind furniture, that the waist is already more pronounced. It's already curving in towards where the belt loops are, right here. It's already curving in there. You can see on the side, it's already conforming to my person. But I notice if I look at the back that it's still kind of baggy there. So I'm going to do something a little more complicated. Sorry, I'm going to do something a little more complicated than just putting a dart in the side seam and taking it in. I'm going to put a dart in the middle of the fabric. And this requires even more math and graphing than last time. I'm just cutting right up to the zigzag line. I don't want to cross that line. And now I'm going to cut in those easing snips we talked about last time. By the way, this is quite good fabric. Even if it was inexpensively made in Malaysia, it is a fairly good cotton, and it's in a weave called, I was just thinking a minute ago. It's in a weave that is used in jeans called a twill. So if you wear a pair of jeans, they're made in a twill pattern. And this is that kind of fabric. That's a really light version of it. There we go. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is figure out where that center line is. And luckily, I remember from before, it was 10.5 inches from the bottom. So I'm going to mark a line across the back that is 10.5 inches from the bottom. I'm actually going to double check that I'm remembering that correctly. There's nothing worse than having your waist on the sides in one place and in the back on another. Yep, 10.5 inches. So I'm going to go all the way across the coat here and put in a line at 10.5 inches. So that's my waistline. Now, I need to pick where the dart is going to go. I don't want it to go over this piece here. That's the belt loop. I think I'm going to put it halfway between the belt loop and the back seam. I could just put one in the back seam as well. That would be exactly like the side seams, but I'm teaching you a new technique, so I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to measure from the belt loop, which is right here. I can feel it through the fabric, and right here on this side, to the center seam along this blue line that I've drawn at 10.5 inches, and it looks like it's at 5.5 inches. So we're going to divide that in half. And 5.5 divided by 2 is 2 3/4. 2.5 and 2.5 is 5 plus 1/4. 2 3/4 is right here. Yep, 2 3/4. And I'm actually going to draw that, mark that all the way down. That's going to be my fold line. I need to know exactly where it is, because when I fold this, I don't want my fold to be slanted. I want it to be perpendicular to the bottom of the coat. Okay, so that's my fold line. Now that I have it, I can fold the fabric there. I'm going to pin it with that blue line at the top of the fold. And that will keep my dart from being slanty. Now, I could use the exact same measurements that I used last time for the side darts. I could have new measurements. I could have it come in sharper at the top and less at the bottom. I know that this blue line marks the highest point. I could also take this handy scrap of fabric that I cut out of the side, and I could lay it down with the side seam against the, you know what, I'm going to use the one with the blue mark on it. Where'd it go? Okay, I'll use this one. This is the one I have. So I remember that the angle was sharper at the bottom, at the hip part, and gentler at the top. So I'm going to line up the threading, the stitching, with the fold, because the stitching represented my fold last time. There's my blue line. I'm going to put the blue lines together. This is totally cheating, by the way. Like, I could just measure it, but if I didn't want to measure it, I could put that down, trace it, and I'd have the exact same curve at all the darts. But I don't really need to do that, so instead I'm going to measure it. I'm going to make this one a little bit different. I'm going to go 3 up. 3 inches up from that center line, and I'm going to do 2.5 inches down from that center line. And then I'm going to go from this point to about that far in. You need to measure how far in that is. Helps if you don't drop your tape measure in the middle of an activity. About 3/4 in, just like last time. There we go. Now I'm going to move these pins while maintaining the smoothness of the fabric. Doesn't matter what angle I go in. So there's the back dart on the first side, and now I'm going to do that whole process over again on the other side to make it perfectly even. Five and a half. So I'm going to go 2 3/4. Now that I have my fold line, I'm going to fold it. And I went 3 up and 2.5 down. And 3/4 in. When you're figuring out your own darts, the amount you take out is how much you want to shrink that space. But you have to make sure that you know how many darts you're going to have. So if you have 4 darts, the total amount you want to take out of the waist is going to be divided by 4. And if you have 3 darts, it's going to be divided by 3. And you also need to make sure that you have a seam allowance in there so that if you, you have to make sure that your stitching goes exactly where you want it to and that you're not taking in more or less. If you cut it first and then stitch it, it might not go in the right place. That's why I always prefer to stitch it first and then cut. Okay, I'm going to go sew these down. and the zigzag. You don't need to knot your zigzag. I do it, but it's not required. It's just one of those things. You can or you can't, it doesn't matter. Now, I've taken out 3/4 of an inch folded in 4 places, which means each dart has taken out 1.5 inches of fabric. So altogether, I've taken out quite a few inches from this garment. It's 3 inches total for the side seams, that's 1.5 inches plus 1.5 inches, and 3 inches total for the back seams, 1.5 inches and 1.5 inches. That is a dramatic change. I'm going to get almost a Victorian waist out of this. It may not even close over my ample person. If I had my corset on, it would. If you are doing historical costuming, this is a way that you can make modern garments much more archaic looking. Here I'm doing the easing snips. I'm totally cutting through the zigzagging, but I am not cutting through the straight stitching. And that's okay, you can do that. By the way, this is what our darts look like on the back. Here's the center back. And I chose not to put a dart here because it's been double sewed down, and that makes it much harder. You'd have to take that out to put the dart in. And you can see it's evenly spaced. It looks really neat. And here's the side seam that we adjusted. Here's the first dart, the second dart, and the other side seam. So I'm going to try this on again. I'm actually going to take the microphone off the back of my dress so you can see how it fits against my waist. So you can see that I've really altered the waist of this garment. It's much, much more fitted, and it pulls in really nicely along my curves. You can see that. I can't button it anymore. This is not an adult jacket. It's clearly a child's jacket if it's this tight on me after just taking off those inches. But I do want to show you the back. You can see how it fits much more smoothly against the back of me, accentuating my waist. Now, you can put darts like this into any piece of clothing that you have. You can put it into a dress. You can put it into shirts. You can put it into jackets. You can put it into anything where you want to bring it in. And I could have put these darts up underneath my bosom if I wanted a more empire style, which is a style that comes in under the bosom. If I was a gentleman, I'd have them lower down so that there's room on the top of the garment for my shoulders, but it tucks in at the waist. So that same technique can be used for all of those things. The next thing I'm going to show you is how you can take in a pair of pants using a dart. And in this case, we're going to use the other kind of dart, the half dart. So I'm going to get that ready and put my microphone back on. Just give me a minute. All right, so we're going to continue our class on darts now. We put in the long darts into a coat and made it fit more cleanly against the person. Now I'm going to show you how to put darts in the top of a pair of trousers. Now, I came all the way from California to do these classes, and I couldn't bring a whole luggage of pieces of clothing to cut up on my way here, so I had to rely on what I could find when I got here. The trousers I'm going to be using for this activity are a little thick for darts. The fabric is quite thick, it's a double twill, and it's not the best choice for this activity, but it was the best of all the ones that I could find. So you can use this technique on any pair of pants, but it works better on pants that are lighter. And that's just because the dart makes it really bulky. So here are the trousers that I found. And these are pretty typical of today's trousers, especially with skinny jeans so popular these days. It's really hard to find a pair of pants that fits you in the hips and the waist at the same time. If you're like me and you buy a pair of trousers that fits in the hips, it's huge around the waist. Or if you buy one that fits around the waist, it's really tight against the hips. If you have childbearing hips, like so many people do, this is a problem you face all the time. But a half dart is the solution to this problem. I put half darts in almost every pair of pants I buy. So the first thing I need to do in order to do a half dart is figure out how much fabric I need to take out of this pair of pants. Now, we're going to have an imaginary model for these pants because these pants are bigger than everyone here. And so we're just going to put 2 darts in them. I'm going to say that I want to take a total of 4 inches out of the top of these pants. That means that each dart is going to be 1 inch wide. That'll take out 2 inches per dart. First thing I need to do is turn these pants inside out. Now, because these pants have pockets in the back, I'm limited in where I can actually put these darts. I'm going to put them in this open space right here, between the hip seam and the back pocket. The dart itself is going to go along this top part here. First thing I have to do is measure this space. So I'm running straight up from the pocket and straight up from the seam. That space is 3 inches wide, which is great because I'm going to be taking 2 of them. Now I have to find the exact center of those 2 points. That's going to be 2.5. This is going to be my fold line. So just like last time, I'm going to put that marking that I made right on top. So I want to go in 1 inch, which is that far from the fold. That's as wide as I'm going to go, right there. And then I'm going to make half a dart. If a whole dart goes from a point out and back to a point, a half dart goes from a point to the wide part. The wide part's up here. So I'm going to say that this dart is going to go down 3 inches, but it doesn't matter. I can make it go down further. But I'm going with 3. I just have to know what it is for both sides. 3 inches. And there's my guideline. Gonna move my pins a little bit so they're out of the way. There's a lot of fabric here. Now I'm also making sure that these two pieces are totally lined up. I'm going to do this on the other side as well. $3 so 2.5. 1.5 is right here. That becomes my fold line. Making sure the top is lined up. Measuring 3 inches down and drawing my guideline. Now to the sewing machine. Now if you just start off at a 45-degree angle, you will get a little pookiness when you put the pants on. So I like to start a little bit further down and try to sew along the fold first to sort of ease the trousers into the dart. I'm going to make sure that I have the right stitch and use a straight stitch. Now these darts just aren't very wide. I could zigzag here and cut them off, and sometimes I do, depending on how thick the fabric is. But I could also just fold them one way or the other and sew them down, which is the other thing that I do. I'm going to do that right now so you can see what it looks like. When the trousers are on, you're really not going to notice anything. I guess if you don't want to sew it down, you could just have it in there. You could just leave it. It's not going to poke up along the top of the trouser pants. You're not going to see it. And it means that if you want to make adjustments later, you can. This fabric is so thick, I would probably zigzag it and then cut it just to get as much fabric out of there as possible. If you do sew it down, you need to make sure that you open the trousers up all the way. If you just sew it across the top, it'll be a problem. Like, it won't lie flat. When I open the trousers all the way, you can see it's at an angle. So I want to open the trousers all the way and use that angle when sewing it down. Now I'm using bright white thread so that you can see what I'm doing. You wouldn't use white thread. You would use thread to match the fabric. Now, if I turn these trousers inside out, of course, if I was sewing it down, I would do that on both sides, but I just want to show you what it looks like either way. And And I think I'll go back to the table to show you, because that's all you do for darts. Half dart at the top of trousers, that's all you're doing. Okay, you can see that the trousers are now much more pronounced waist, but there's still lots of hip room. The dart itself came out pretty smoothly. If I were to put these on, it would lie nicely along my hips. I might get kind of a point there. And the way that you solve that problem is you just run the stitching down the fold a little bit more. So if I were to run the stitching down like that a little bit, it's not going to take out any fabric, but it's going to blend the dart into the fabric a little bit more. Now you can see that I have a pair of trousers which are much smaller waist, but still lots of rooms for the hips. And that's what we were going for in these top darts. You can also put darts like this into a skirt, and you would use the other kind of dart in a dress, because you'd need it to come from above the waist into the waist and then out again. So that's our lesson on darts. I'm Sophia, and this is the Geek Group.
This video was made possible by a grant from the Future Girl Foundation.
This video was made possible by thousands of private donations from members and viewers like you. Please visit thegeekgroup.org for more information on how you can donate and become a part of our dreams of Avalon.